I have a confession to make. In 35 to 40 years in this hobby, I have never actually painted a Tyranid. So naturally, I thought I'd start at the obvious place with the Red Terror, or in my case, the Pink Punisher. As soon as I saw the new Kill Team Terror on Devlan set, I knew I had to have it. And Games Workshop very kindly sent me a copy of this box set to paint up for you. So I started out with my SAS themed Veteran Guardsman. You can go and check out the video on that as well. But I have to say, this is the one I was super excited about. The Red Terror has had a few iterations in the past. I think one of the worst miniatures that Games Workshop ever released at one point. Now, however, just look at this beauty. Like I said, I have never painted Tyranids, and this is my first ever attempt at painting one. If you've watched any of my other painting videos, you will notice that I apply a less is more philosophy to painting miniatures. When thinking about how I was going to paint a Tyranid, I thought that this philosophy matches perfectly with Tyranids due to the amount of detail and organic, beautiful sculpting that we have on a miniature like the Red Terror. I want this sculpt to breathe. I want to accentuate its detail without going through too many processes and making it too hard and overcomplicated. What I've achieved here, I think, is a very simple method that some might call lazy, but I think has lots of character, lots of vibe, and generally looks pretty terrifying by the end. Apologies in advance for any lack of focus. This is a huge miniature and it's quite hard to catch the entire thing on camera. We're going to start off with a zenithal prime. What that means is I've sprayed the entire miniature with Chaos Black spray from underneath. I've then gone over the top with a white scar paint as well. I want really high contrast, and we're going to go with no other base colors on this miniature pretty much. We're just going to use the prime as the base for our miniature. Now, I was kind of stuck for base ideas as this is a huge base, so I went into the garden, I got some sticks and twigs and little rocks and pebbles, and I chucked them onto the base and glued them down with super glue. Now, I will say it would have been nice to have perhaps left the miniature off the base and done the base separately, because it is quite hard to get into the nooks and crannies here. But the first thing we're going to do is actually paint the base, and this is going to be a Citadel contrast paint, Militarum green in this case. I'm going to use quite a large brush. I'm just going to smush it and absolutely saturate the entire base with this paint. Don't worry if you get a little bit on the miniature here, particularly on the tail. You don't want to get any on the upper body, but the tail is fine because this is going to be sort of integrated with the base later on. For the stone areas, like the little Imperial statue here, we're going to use Gryph-Charger Grey as well, and these are the only two contrast paints I'm using on the base so far. Once we do that, we're going to go with one tiny little aspect of a different color here, and this is just to break things up a little bit. I'm going to be using Flesh Tearers Red just on the underside and any of those little sort of organic, sort of deep areas on the miniature. Nothing too crazy here. The sort of scales under the tail and the little sort of vents on the arms, I'm not sure what you'd call them, and inside the mouth here with this nice dark Flesh Tearers Red. Now here's where things get interesting. Like I said before, I am not going to be using any other paints on this miniature pretty much. We're going to go with a reductive process. What I mean by this is we're going to apply lots of enamels and oils to this miniature to accentuate the detail, add texture, and just see what we can do based off just a zenithal prime and a tiny weeny hint of color in those recesses. I've got 3 enamel washes here. I've got a dirty brown enamel wash, a pink enamel wash, and a black enamel wash here. I'm also going to be using some oil paints later on as well. Starting off with the crimson enamel wash here, I'm going to apply this all over the underside of the miniature. So any of the sort of soft parts of the miniature, inside the mouth and around any sort of softer organic areas that don't have armor plating over the top of them. This is where I'll add several layers of this crimson and start building it up and moving it around. The great thing about enamels and oils is you have a long working time, so you can really go crazy with this, and if you add too much, you can just add some mineral spirits and reduce it to your heart's content. It's a beautiful way of working, and it really is very, very satisfying just slowly building this up. The only thing I would say is there is quite a long drying time. You can use a hairdryer, and I did in this instance, but you know, if you are going to add a lot of enamels and oils to a miniature, it will just add to that drying time. So it can be frustrating waiting for a miniature to fully cure before you move on to the next process. I'm then going to move on to my sort of dark blackish grey enamel wash here. I'm going to put this all over the sort of armor plating and carapace, or chitin, to want for a better word, all over the Red Terror. Now I'm doing this with the crimson still slightly wet here, so I don't really care at this point if things merge and blend together a little bit. That just adds to the effect and creates a more realistic, organic looking creature. It's important that you do use an old brush here, or a synthetic brush as well. If you have lots of synthetic brushes, they are cheap. I just use the old brushes that are just completely knackered. Don't use your best brushes on this because they will get absolutely shredded. With that first layer of 2 different enamel paints down, you can see that already this is bringing out some of the detail. Things have blended together a little bit, but it's not too much of a problem. I'm going to go in later on and add layer upon layer of different enamels and oils over this to build up the effect even more. For now though, I'm going to go in with an eyeshadow blender. I believe these things have got a sponge tip, and they're definitely much better than using a cotton bud, which leaves or tends to leave fibers behind on the miniature. If you can find these on Temu or AliExpress, I definitely recommend getting them. They're a lot softer and less abrasive as well. What I'm going to be doing with these is just dipping them in a little bit of odorless mineral spirits and working my way around the miniature, wiping off the excess moisture and taking off some of the enamel wash on those upper outer areas, leaving that muddiness, that dirtiness in the recesses. After drying this with a hairdryer a little bit, I'm happy to move on to the next phase. I'm now going to go into the entire miniature with my sort of brown wash now, just to sort of unify things together a little bit more and build up even more detail. It's so satisfying working in this way, just building up layer upon layer of detail and texture. I decided that actually I'll only add the brown to the armor panels and the chitin on this miniature, not on the pink areas, as I want those to stay nice and pale. Again, same process as before, waiting for this to dry a little bit before we go in with our eyeshadow applicator and start removing and blending things together. Taking a step back and looking at the miniature so far, I figured that I wanted the pink to be a little bit deeper and more vibrant, a bit more like raw, uncomfortable, sore flesh. So we're going to go in with another layer of the crimson enamel wash now, just to build it up a little bit further. And again, this is the beauty of this whole process, is that we can just keep on doing this until we get things looking how we want them. Following up with the same process, again with the eyeshadow applicator here, just smoothing things down and removing some of that surface grime. I then figured that I wanted to bring back some of the paleness on the chitin now, so I go back in with some Wraithbone on a stippling brush, and I do a dry brush all over the edges of these armor panels as well, just to make things pop a little bit more and add further depth to this sculpt. Now I left this guy to dry for 2 or 3 days actually while I was working my day job, and you know, I had to do this because things are fairly humid here in Sydney. It might be different in North America or Europe say, but it's very humid here, so it tends to mean that the drying time is a little bit longer. Anyway, things are pretty much dry at this point, so I'm going to go in with some fluorescent reddish pink paint and just fill in those little eyeballs. Really hard to get to, by the way, because they're hidden behind these sort of horn pincer type things. The next thing we're going to do is add a little bit of gore to this miniature. The Red Terror, or the Pink Punisher to his mates, is described as swallowing guardsmen whole in the lore, which is pretty terrifying if you ask me. So I thought naturally I should add a little bit of blood and gore to this guy. Now I'm not going to go too crazy with this. We're keeping it nice and simple with some Citadel blood for the blood god. But how I'm going to apply it is a little bit different here. What I'm going to do on these big sort of pincer claw stabby things is actually add a layer of neat mineral spirits over them before applying the blood for the blood god. And you'll see me do it here. What this does is the odorless mineral spirits and the acrylic paint do not mix. They are not compatible. If you put water and oil together, obviously they don't mix, and the oil sits on top of the water and creating a sort of oil slick. That is the effect we're going for here. We want the blood for the blood god to sit on top of the oil and form almost splash looking puddles on the surface of this miniature. It's a really, really nice effect. If I just went in and brushed this on, it would look a bit naff. I tend to find that this creates really organic and unintentional sort of patterns to the blood splatters. And again, due to the drying time here, we have a little bit of time to work with. We can move things around until they look really realistic. I'm then going to go in and bring out some of the detail on the base here. Even though this will be covered up a little bit later, I'm going to go with a bright minty green just to go over this sort of foresty looking base that we've got so far, because I haven't quite settled on what I'm going to do with the base yet, but the miniature otherwise is finished. Anyway, I'm doing a very heavy sort of over brushing here. I've got far too much paint on my brush, but I'm going to do it anyway. Gorse Blaster green just to bring out some detail. Since I've been flying by the seat of my pants on this entire miniature, and this is my first Tyranid, I thought I might as well do something different with the base here as well. Now, I do normally use pigments on my bases, however, I usually use them dry, of course. What I'm going to do here, though, is actually add little bits of different coloured pigment to different areas of the base, and then I'm going to try and see what happens if I add water to the mix. Starting off with a nice sort of burnt umber here, we're just going to add this in some key areas, being quite random really, and then we're going to build this up using a bright orange and then onto a yellow afterwards. With all of the pigments added to the base now, let's see what happens if I take a large brush and mix it with some water and just dab it all over the surface, breaking down these pigments so that they flow into the recesses of this very detailed base. One thing I didn't consider was the oils and enamels that have gone onto the base in the process of painting this miniature. So what we do have is a little bit of water resistancy here. It's fine though. I'm just going to go around and absolutely saturate it. What could have been good actually, and this is something I might try in the future, is use a spray bottle perhaps to apply the water over the base here. But it's all about experimentation. I love experimenting with my miniatures. I love pushing the boat and trying to do different things each time. Sometimes it doesn't work out, sometimes it really does though. And when it does, the feeling is awesome. So there you go, look, it's dried and it's moved the pigments into areas that I wanted to get them into without me having to leave things looking too dry and dusty. It's selling the effect of dust and dirt and grime, but you know, it's mixed things around a little bit and just made it look a bit more interesting than, say, just applying pigments neat out of the bottles. On to the most satisfying part of the entire process, and this of course is rimming out the base using my AK Interactive quick markers, I believe they're called. So here we are guys, the finished Red Terror. This was very easy to achieve. As you'll see, not many processes here. I left it with a Zenithal Prime, and what we got here is a very pale and terrifying and disgusting looking Tyranid. I wanted to go for pure vibes, pure disgusting sort of stuff, and I'm really happy with the textures and the detail that's built up on this miniature, considering I haven't actually used any real paint in any part of this miniature really. It's just technical paints, enamel washes, and a couple of contrasts, throwing on some pigments at the end there as well. Very simple to achieve, and it just goes to show that less is truly more. Let me know what you think about this miniature though. I'm pretty happy with it. I know that I could have gone a lot further, but that's not the point. I wanted to keep things nice and simple, let the miniature breathe, let the sculpt do the work rather than me doing it, which I guess you could see as lazy. However, I personally think this is a really nice and freeing way to paint miniatures, and I think Tyranids particularly lean into this really well, and I'm really happy with the results. Let me know what you think down below. I'd like to know your thoughts, and if you would like to apply this to your miniatures, I'd love to know how you go. Anyway, do please make sure to join the Discord as well as supporting me via Patreon. Please do like, share, and subscribe this video as well, and I'll be back with another one real soon. Peace out.